Hey, what's up, friends? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. It's an early in the week pod, so that means we're going to be breaking down the Patriots opener. We have Pete Kendall. He'll join us once again. He'll go over what he saw up front from the Patriots offensive line and give us some insight on what the Patriots could do going forward. Also, what I'm hearing on wide receiver Kendrick Bourne and what we may see going forward. How long will a fix take for this Patriots offense? And we'll take a look ahead to the Pittsburgh-Steelers matchup coming up Sunday. They absolutely got after Joe Burrow in the opener, harassing him into a combined 12 picks and sacks. Could be a big challenge for a back-weary Mac Jones. But first, let's look back a little bit. This is Dan Orlovsky from ESPN. He is one of their studio analysts, and he does a good job breaking down the film. He's made a reputation doing that. Here's what Dan's appraisal was of the Patriots' first game product.
My biggest takeaway from this game is I don't know the last time I saw an organization that is as good as New England look so unprepared for a football game. Offensively, there's no plan. Looks like there's no preparation. They ran 3 different plays, okay? So I run this first play. They ran those things 4 different times. So this play, I ran it 4 times. Then this play, I ran it 4 times. Then this play, I ran it 4 times. All within the first 50 snaps of the game. They ran the same play 3 times in the first 11 offensive snaps. Like,
That's not good.
The quarterback is... The quarterback's getting to the line of scrimmage. The spacing of their pass game. There's a play that there's a swing route to the back, and there's shallow cross and sit, all within like 7 yards of each other. That's teams that we make fun of usually offensively. Yeah. That's not an organization that's run that way. The quarterback has absolutely no answers with protection. He's getting his head beat in because nobody's on the same play. It was in the preseason. Now, I don't know. I'm shocked that the Patriots look this dysfunction on offense.
The protection thing was so confusing when the safety blitz
off the left edge.
Yeah, and I'm like, how does Mac Jones?
The sack fumble.
But they turn that way.
What Mac Jones is good at.
The offensive line turns that way, but the tackle and the guard go.
All right, there's Dan Orlovsky's viewpoint. Now we bring in our guy Pete Kendall, 13-year NFL veteran, a first-round pick in 1996. He played offensive guard. He started virtually every game he was in the league during that period of time. Pete, you heard what Dan Orlovsky had to say. What did you see? Or what's your reaction to Dan first?
Yeah, so I look at things a little bit differently. I hear Dan's critique of the route combinations, and I'll defer to him on those. That's not my area of expertise, but I saw a couple of things that left my head scratching and sort of lent a lot of credence to what you and some of your colleagues had said about the protection issues. In particular, the 2 sacks in the first half had me really scratching my head. The first one, the free hitter, Ogba. I've watched the TV copy maybe 25 times, and I can't tell exactly what they're trying to do there. I think it's hot protection, in which case, Cole Strange and David Andrews setting to their right is curious to me, very curious.
And that's the first one where they set to their right, and it was just a defensive end walking through to get to Mac Jones.
Right. So if it's truly hot protection, and I think that it is based on the back's posture and the back's release. Can
you tell me hot protection just for us lay people?
Sure thing. It's the 5 offensive linemen against everybody else. You got the 5 blockers, and you've got to pick the 5 most dangerous and block those guys as they come. And
that point. The point we always see is that's not pointing to the 5th guy, or is that?
That's where you'll start,
okay.
But you have to take anything else that comes. And so usually in a hot protection against that front, which is under front, not to get too deep into the weeds, but essentially the defensive end away from the tight end reduces down and then covers the backside guard, in this case, Owenu. Other than that, it's a very standard look. It's one of the most basic looks that you can have. If it's hot protection, then what they would have on the left side, Strange and Brown would have what we call a dual or a drag dual read. And they've got to take the Mike linebacker, who winds up buzzing out to cover the back coming, the defensive end Ogba, who goes unblocked, and Ingram coming off the edge. And if I'm Mac and that's hot protection, and another reason why I think it was hot protection is he didn't throw the ball right now. because he felt like he was picked up. That Ingram would be blocked by Brown, and that Ogba would be blocked by Strange. That's what I think it is. But there is evidence in there that it's slide protection, because both David Andrews and Cole Strange slide to their right. They take 2 steps, slide to the right, like it's just basic slide protection, that the back has the Mike and the Sam, and he's going to check out. And then in which instance Trent would block Ogba, and the back would pick up Ingram, and away we go. But that's not what happened. And you look and you see that Owenu's setting down inside to prevent potentially any run through, which again would suggest hot protection, because Andrews, Strange, and Brown have to work left. So
we got a couple of guys doing hot and a couple of guys doing slide.
That's what it looks like to me. Yes.
Okay, so it's not. So I thought it was less. I thought it was less dire, because I thought it was everybody was doing one thing and somebody messed up another. It seems that, again, and we have this caveat to everything as we sit here and we're not in the meeting rooms, and you got a guy who was a sketchy JV end for Silver Lake, and Pete, who's not in the meeting rooms, but he could certainly hold his own, but he's not. He's going to tell you every time. He doesn't know exactly. But between us, we're surmising that it wasn't just one mistake. It could be a cavalcade of errors. Let's go then, before we get into the why of it and what that might signal, those kinds of issues. Let's get to the strip sack that turned into a touchdown that really was the key play in the game when you look at a defense that only allowed 1 bust touchdown and otherwise just 7 points.
Well, I guess the good news on that one, Tom, is it looked like at least 4 of the 5 guys were on the same page. So I don't know if you want to call that improvement.
It's a victory.
Say again?
It's a victory.
Right. So, what happened is it looked like Mac came up. He pointed out the Mike backer. Everybody was on the same page. They're going to slide to the left. The safety who's playing, I guess, the nickel will in that situation, walks down late, stands at the end of the line of scrimmage, or gets to the end of the line of scrimmage. Telltale sign, of course, that guy's going. He comes, and I think either the call didn't get out to Trent, or he just got locked on, got so late in the cadence, and he got locked on. And I think that one is just, unfortunately, a mental error, just a bust. But there also could be some communication in there that needed to come out and maybe didn't.
When we look at that play and we see Mac Jones really not even look to his left, that is the sign of a completely secure and at ease quarterback who goes, "My guy's got this."
Yeah, very similar to the first sack, where he didn't seem particularly hurried, because I think he thought he was picked up on that side. I think he thought he was picked up on his backside on the strip sack, and X's and O's on the grease board he was.
When we look at that situation, first, I guess, will Mac going forward have to be even more on his P's and Q's, so to speak? The way, you see Brady or Manning, and this is a second-year quarterback who's working with kind of a reconfigured offensive line with more guys on it who are in prime positions. Brown was not on the left last year. Wynn was not on the right. Onwenu was not a starter. Cole Strange was in college. So when we talk about continuity on the Patriots offensive line, it's kind of a misnomer. It's a lot of guys in different spots. Is Mac going to have to be more on point and make sure that guys are looking back and making sure they have all those calls, which of course will prevent them from going fast, but you got to go right first. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know what much more Mac could do in that instance. At some point you just have to move on. A bust is a bust, and it happens, unfortunately. Obviously it gets magnified much more so in this day and age than perhaps in years past. But you come up, you identify the front, you point to the Mike linebacker, you trust that, the guys around you know all that means, and you go play. And 9 times out of 10, it goes off without a hitch. And the only error that you might have is a physical error that somebody just gets beat, right? And that's football. But I don't think you can spend too much time doing too much more worrying about the mentals. You just got to trust that the guys are going to get it figured out.
Since these are issues that existed in the summer, and then they show up in the first game, and in many ways cost them the result in the first game, how difficult is it for these players to come out of that Miami game with great confidence, since it's already an ongoing issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fair question. I think that the answers are, I don't want to oversimplify it. So I won't say that the answers are easy, but the answers are there. And it just takes, whether it's additional time in the meeting room, with the quarterback, with the backs, with the offensive line, or just the line themselves and communicating, just getting on the same page. Hey, here's the look, pause. Do we all agree that this is how we're going to identify it? Okay. What are our protections into this look? Are we all on the same page? Do we get it? What's our call here? What's our call there? Our what ifs? Let's move on to the next look. And I'm sure that that's gone on, but that's an ongoing process that goes on week in and week out as you prepare for the next opponent.
If you were an NFL offensive line coach, Pete, and this happened, would you get back on the grease board or say, John, get the beep ready. What the is going on? You know what you're supposed to do. Let's do it the way we're supposed to.
I think you have to do both. I mean, I think I think your second reaction is the first and most natural reaction. But I think your job as a coach is to make sure your guys are prepared and are on the same page and understand and see things the way that you do. And so if that means literally going back to square one and identifying defenses, then you go back to square one and start with how are we going to identify defenses? And then you go through your protections, you go through your adjustments, then you move on to the next defense. And that's really not that much different than what happens when you play a clean game. You come in on Monday, you watch Sunday's film, and then you turn on the film for the next opponent and you throw last Sunday away, good or bad. It's on to the next. And again, you start with the basics. What do they do? What do they do in regular down and distance? And then as the week goes through, you work your way through situations. Third down and short, third down and long, red zone, goal line. And you literally do the same thing week in and week out. Do we all see it this way? What are our adjustments? What are our plays? Can we move on to the next one? And that's what they'll do.
We heard Dan Orlovsky speak about and I kind of noticed this myself, again, as a layperson. I'm not, Charlie X's and O's, but the offense was a little bit primitive, wasn't very layered. There weren't a lot of setups to other things. And really, I ascribed some of that takeaway to the 4th and 3 play that ended up there was a little swing out in the left flat to Ty Montgomery that was covered. That's not that intricate. And you have Mac cruising around and eventually throws into a team meeting. The 4th and 1, 28-yarder into the end zone to Devontae Parker that got broken up, but the Patriots got a flag on it. That doesn't seem like what you would call a high percentage chain moving play. It didn't seem that innovative. You, as a person who's been in the league, did you kind of see the same thing that Dan did, that I did, in terms of the structure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as in the weeds as Dan is on some of that stuff, so I try to limit my opinion to sort of what I'm seeing. What's going on in the run game, what's going on up front. That being said, you don't have to have a PhD and down the field passing to understand that there wasn't a lot open at times when they stepped back to throw the ball, and so whether that some of that clearly, as we just discussed, was protection. And some of that sounds like people who know more than me think that's play design. And so we'll see where we go from here.
So before we get into some of the personnel and the Kendrick Bourne situation, I do want to ask you this. With the Pittsburgh Steelers and Brian Flores as a defensive mind with them now as well, they're a blitz-heavy team. They get after it. Flores understands the Patriots' intricacies and tendencies, even though they're changing their offense. Is this a difficult matchup on the road now?
Yeah, I mean, they're all difficult matchups on the road, some harder than others, right? But just playing on the road in and of itself presents challenges for offenses, if, at the very least, crowd noise, right? Now you throw a blitz, happy, aggressive scheme at a group that is still trying to come together. They've played all of one game together at this point in this configuration. And you couple in the fact that Flores has some familiarity with the system, and while the run game system, there's been a lot of chatter about how that's changed and what they're prioritizing has changed. I didn't really see that on Sunday. But I'd be surprised if they changed a lot in the drop back system. So protections are protections, and defensive coordinators know how to attack protections. Whether you were with an organization or not, you turn on the film, you see what they're doing, you see what the tendencies are, and you come up with a plan to attack it.
All right, Pete, one of the other ongoing conversations that we had coming out of that game was personnel, specifically Kendrick Bourne. And he played 2 snaps. When he was out there, he caught 1 pass for 41 yards. So on the bright side, he's going to have a tremendous yards per catch, probably leading the league right now. On the downside, it's a guy who had 55 catches last year. I want to read this quote from Robert Kraft to Jeff Howe of The Athletic earlier this spring. And he said, speaking about Mac Jones' development, time will tell. Part of it, in fairness, is the chemistry of the people around him. I hope that some of the free agents who we brought in who didn't perform as high as we would have liked last year will produce this year because they've adjusted to the system. And we're making changes to take advantage of what they do best. We have a lot of talent that hasn't been tapped into yet, in my opinion. That's end quote. That's Robert Kraft. And I look at that, and you see Kendrick Bourne on the sidelines not having his abilities tapped into. My understanding is that Robert Kraft was at the game on Sunday. We do know that he was at the game. My understanding also is that it definitely caught his eye that Kendrick Bourne was down for the majority of the game. And my understanding also is I would not bet on that happening again. Also, my understanding is that, look, this is kind of a Matt Patricia issue right now. Kendrick Bourne has reportedly been critical. Albert Breer mentioned that in the offseason. Excuse me, reported that Kendrick Bourne has been critical of the offense, the direction it's going. This is an offense that Bourne was running in the same scheme when he was with San Francisco. Matt Patricia is installing it here. According to Albert Breer, he has at times voiced his displeasure with the way things were going. I also understand that there have been times when he has been a little late for meetings, and there was an outgrowth prior to the Carolina game in the preseason that saw him sitting down because of a meeting. We also saw him get kicked out of a practice prior to the Carolina game because he threw a punch, and also kicked out of a rep because he didn't have his equipment straight. So there's a lot going on there. I think he's in Matt Patricia's doghouse. I think he's also a talented player. And I also think you have this overarching Robert Kraft edict to, I'm spending money on these guys. Let's get something out of them. Pete, give me your overview as having been in the league on a situation like this.
Yeah, a lot of palace intrigue here, Tom. Lot to unpack. On the one hand, if you're trying to establish a system, you're hoping that you get buy-in from everybody. On the other hand, respect is earned at that level, at many levels, and so KB has the obligation, I think, to give it a shot, and to give it a chance. But professional players are, particularly guys that are familiar with systems, are going to have their own opinions. How does that? Can you be productive, right, and be helpful, or is it a negative? And are the coaches open to additional input? I don't know any of all of that going on down there.
Yep.
What I would say is it's probably an uncomfortable place to be a coach when you hear some of the things that are being tied to coming out of the ownership suite about who gets on the field and maybe who doesn't. And so that, less than ideal for both, for sure.
Yeah, but Robert Kraft has really worked to make sure he never looks like a meddler. But if I'm him and I'm looking at, hey, I got $90 million worth of contracts tied into Aguilar, Jonnu Smith, and Kendrick Bourne, $30 million worth of cap space. And in 2021, we didn't get very much from Smith or Aguilar. And then in the opener, Bourne sits all game. Smith doesn't get a ball completed to him until late in the third quarter. And you've got Bill, who has decided to replace Josh McDaniels with guys who don't have experience. I think if I'm the owner, it's going to catch my eye. and say, look, I get it, but I said in the offseason I wanted to see this shit fixed a little bit and these guys get a little more run. And I'm not seeing it. Not only that, I'm seeing guys putting mothballs. It's a dynamic that I can, I guess, understand if you are the 80-year-old owner, experience, accustomed to things going a certain way without having to inject yourself.
Well, no doubt. I mean, we all have bosses unless we're the owners. And so, typically Bill's had, free reign to do whatever he wants to do with the personnel there. And rightfully so. He certainly did quite a bit over the past 20 plus years with his decision-making and his roster construction. Not that it's all been perfect, but it was pretty darn good. So, this is a little bit of a departure, I think, for Robert. But I certainly understand why somebody wants to see a return on their investment. I guess what's different is that, maybe some of this stuff is making its way into the general public and into the media discussion, whereas I'm assuming in years past it probably didn't. And some of that might be a sense of urgency based on the calendar and the sands of grain in the hourglass, if you will. And some of that might just be the fact that, it hasn't been quite what it was several years ago now for the last 3 years.
Right.
And so sometimes this is the result of not winning at the highest levels.
Yeah. And it's funny because, Pete, we've seen Robert Kraft use that owners meeting. And this, again, that quote was from Robert Kraft speaking at the owners meetings to Jeff Howe. He's used that to invoke disappointment with the drafts, which he did on a conference call around the owners meetings in 2021. And now this past year with Jeff Howe say, hey, I want to see more from those guys. And I think we're tweaking the system in the way I expect. But I think that going forward, especially if you score 7 points and those guys are in mothballs, it's not going to go over huge. All right, last question for you. On one hand, it's early. On the other, this went exactly as we figured it might in week one. Is it tough to ask for patience? In your estimation as a fan or a former player, is it tough to ask for patience when some of these issues, i.e. the coaching staff and the step back you're taking because of it, are a little bit self-created?
Yeah, I think this is it. It's tough to ask for patience. It's professional sports. I don't think that anybody looked at this as a rebuild year. I mean, I think there are other situations across the league where you might ask for patience because you have a new player. I guess I'm speaking specifically of, say, San Francisco. Okay, sure. Very talented team, but a brand new first time starting quarterback, and so maybe patience is more to be expected out there. Here, a little bit different. We just talked about the free agent signings from a year ago. You have a quarterback now in his second year who had particularly by rookie standards, a very productive first season. And so, yeah, it's hard to ask for patience, and yet pressing the panic button 1 week into the season, unproductive,
right.
not helpful, and probably unnecessary at this point. It's that fine line between when does our sense of urgency force us to do better, and when does it force us to do worse? Right?
Yeah.
When does that force us to do things that ultimately aren't going to be productive? And so, we sit here going into week two, and the league has changed a little bit in the sense that it's now 7 teams getting into the playoffs, not 6. But I can recall the urgency between week 1 and week 2 when I was playing, and we lost week 1, which was most of the time, unfortunately. The media is quick to point out, okay, the history of teams starting 0-2 and getting to the playoffs is quite poor. Now, obviously, it has to be better with a 7th team now. Your chances of getting to the playoffs, you can start 0-2 with one more game and one more playoff spot. But it's still not suggestive of longer-term success. So I know there'll be some urgency to get this fixed and get one in the win column. And then I think everybody can exhale and kind of get on with the season.
And that's what's hard to really divine off that opener. There's competent 0-2s and there's desperately ugly 0-2s. Was the Patriots opener a just missed, as Bill Belichick is indicating, or was it a continuation of things that we saw in the summer, as some of us are alleging? We always defer to Bill's brain being bigger than ours, but a lot of us could see coming what kind of happened in the opener. Pete Kendall, we're going to do more with you, if that's okay.
All right, I'm here for it.
All right, buddy. Thanks so much. I'm going to bring in my good friend Mark Kaboly from The Athletic, Pittsburgh. He's been covering the Steelers for a long, long time. Mark, they got to be sky high down there after their performance in the opener against the defending AFC champion Bengals.
You must not know much about Pittsburgh then, Tom. Come on now. They're always going to find some negatives here. And number one negative is T.J. Watt's hurt. He's going to be out for, a couple weeks to a month to the season. And the offense is absolutely awful, and the offensive line's terrible, and the quarterback can't throw the ball down the field. But somehow they are able to beat the Bengals on the road despite creating 5 turnovers. So there's still some cautiousness around the city, still thinking this team's going to be a 6-11, 7-10 type of team. So you're not going to make people in Pittsburgh happy off of one game.
Well, good, because there's a large amount of trepidation here in New England after a loss. So there's a little bit of a grounding for it. But the Steelers have not had great success against the Patriots down there when they play them at home. But the Patriots product that you saw on Sunday was one that had a difficult time even communicating protection for Mac Jones. He ends up with a back injury when he got high load a little bit. There has to be a real opportunity here for the Steelers to, especially with Brian Flores involved, exploit some of the problems the Patriots are having in their transition.
Yeah, you would think so, because the one thing that did play extremely well Sunday was the defense and the pressure, and that's not with Watt doing a whole ton. It was more on the other side with Alex Highsmith, and they're bringing a lot of different type of pressure. So I'm sure they're going to try to exploit the Patriots, I guess, not revamp, but maneuver the offensive line around a little bit to try to create pressure. But, once again, people in Pittsburgh are always cautious when it comes to the Patriots, because it's always Bill Belichick. They don't see Bill Belichick as a team that's rebuilding. They always just say Bill Belichick always messes with Mike Tomlin's mind, always out-coaches him. This is just going to be another opportunity for him to do that. But I can tell you one thing, Tom, watching a little bit of the Steelers and the Patriots, I think we're going to look at first 1 to 7 wins the game?
100%, because the Patriots played well on defense, except for their one bust just before the half on a 4th and 7 that was inexcusable and preventable going forward. How did Mitch Trubisky perform the other day?
He did what they wanted him to do, not turn the ball over and find a way to win. Now, did he help produce that? Nah, there was a lot of stuff that he didn't have to. They didn't want him to do. They didn't want him to throw the ball down the field. They wanted to, keep the ball in their own hands, not turn the ball over, give them a chance to win with the defense. So if you look at it that way, they did exactly what they wanted. But that offense didn't move at all. The running game with Najee Harris, Najee still got that foot injury. He had suffered in training camp. He wasn't 100%. The offensive line's not going to move anybody. Trubisky's in a bad situation. He has talent around him in the skill positions, but they just don't want him to lose it right now. I think they're very, very cautious of how they played the Bengals. They got up 7-0 real quick on the Fitzpatrick pick 6, and I think they played it close to the vest right there. But once again, they're going to have to start believing in the offensive line. They're going to have to start trying, even though they stink. I'll be frank with you, and try to open it up a little bit, because they got the receivers. They just got to trust Trubisky a little bit more than they did on Sunday.
Oh, man. Over under total sacks and quarterback hits could be real high for the two teams combined. We could be 10 for total sacks and 25 for total quarterback hits. And if Mac has a back, which he does, and its prognosis is a little encouraging right now, there still is an opportunity to see Brian Hoyer, I would think. Last question for you, Mark, before we let you go. Brian Flores, part of the coaching staff down there. How involved is he, and what's his defined role?
He's considered a linebacker coach. He helps a lot with the inside linebackers. But what he really is Mike Tomlin's right-hand man. He's the guy that's obviously been there, done that, should be still doing that at a higher level than he is as a special assistant to the what defense or whatever his title is right now. So, you got 3 very smart defensive guys, and Tomlin, the D coordinator, new to this year, Terrell Austin and Brian Flores, getting together every Tuesday, like right now, putting together a game plan. And you saw a lot of different wrinkles, what they did against the Bengals, and be able to confuse. If you watched that Bengals game, Joe Burrow was just throwing the receivers like throwing the defensive backs like they were receivers. He was so confused. So I think that's a huge hire for the Steelers back in February, March. That's probably going a little bit under the wire. Not to the fact that he's going to help on the field a ton, which he has, but just the schematics of everything. And I think that goes without saying that it was a huge hire, and it's already paying dividends. I mean, the defense was unbelievable the other day, and you would have to believe that a lot of that was scheming and game planning that probably partly came from Brian Flores.
Yeah, there's no denying the Patriots defense actually, ironically, after Matt Patricia left as a head coach and Flores became their defensive coordinator, first de facto and then named defensive coordinator, was a real pain in the ass to deal with in 2018, in 2019. All right, Mark Kaboly, we really appreciate you taking the time with us. I want to wish you a good – wait, was Flores there in 19 or am I No, he was gone. He was gone in 19. Yeah, so he was there in 18. So 17 and 18. So it's all good. It's all good. I don't want to, you know how it is. It's down the same way down there. Same way in Pittsburgh as it is up here. I make that mistake. Hey, dipshit. He wasn't there at 19. Got to cover my bases.
That's the only thing anybody will get off of this interview, that you made a mistake. Right?
Appreciate you, Mark. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on Sunday.
All right. See you, Tom.
All right. I hope you people didn't miss Phil, okay? Maybe sometimes Phil needs a Tuesday off. But he'll be back on Thursday, as will Matt Castle, as will I, with Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast, the television edition. Great stuff from Pete Kendall and Mark Kaboly. Patriots will look to get themselves right this week, and we'll talk to you later in the week. Thanks. Have a good week.